Hey everybody, this is Andrew Greenberg with the Georgia Game Developers Association. Tonight we're at Joystick Game Bar. You can't see it around us. There are a million great video games here, a lot of people eating, drinking, and making merry. And especially the happiest fellow here we have right next to us right now. Joe, why don't you introduce yourself, tell them a little about the Atlanta Game Dev Meetup, and then we get into the clutter.
Sure. The Atlanta Game Dev Meetup. Oh, but first myself.
Yes.
I am the Joe of Puzzles by Joe. I am mostly a solo indie. And some argue that I am the most successful, mostly solo indie in the Atlanta area because my games have made about $2 million and I get to keep a percentage of that. But that's over 7 years. I'm not rich or anything. So that's the big thing. This group is the oldest meetup, game dev meetup in Atlanta. It even predates the formation of the GGDC and
GGDA.
GGDA.
Don't get me sued.
Oh,
Copyrights, Joe.
GGDA and Siege, of course, which it comes up in less than 2 months.
You're right,
Woo!
October 6th, 8th.
Okay, so that's who I am, and this meetup gets anywhere between 20 and 40 people. We ping pong between here, the lovely Joystick Gaming Bar in downtown Atlanta, and Dave and Buster's a little bit on the perimeter.
Excellent. And so the focus of all these interviews is about game development. What do they do? How can you do it? And so forth. So Joe has a great line called Clutter. So tell us about Clutter, your rapid action first-person shooter.
Yeah, Clutter is a game I wrote for the hidden object market just because it was the largest market I knew I could attack without doing any marketing. I go through a bunch of distributors, Big Fish Games, iWin, Game House, Wild Tangent, Shockwave's even alive, and basically they put my games out, and as long as I get some downloads and some buys, I stay up there for a little while, and that keeps me in business.
So let's start with where people find your games. Let's go with puzzlesbyjoe.com. Can they find your game there?
Yes, if you just remember Puzzles by Joe or Clutter Game, you'll find me.
All right, so let's talk about the making of the very first Clutter. So this was one you did pretty much everything yourself. So you didn't use any engine. You made your own engine, your own proprietary engine for it.
No, I borrowed the one from the last place I worked. So it was actually a third-generation engine built on top of SDL that we lovingly called the framework. And when I left iWin after making them a successful game in the casual download space called Mahjong Quest, and I made 3 of them, I cut a deal with them that for right of first refusal, I could use my tools still.
Excellent, excellent. All right. So tell us about that process, because I want to compare the process of making a game like that to making a game today with the engines you're using now.
I don't understand the
question.
So
talk a little about your process. You're working primarily in C++ at that point.
Correct. So the framework sits on top of SDL that does sort of the underlying, it talks to OpenGL, it does the graphics, it does a lot of stuff. But the framework does get down to the bit level, so I was writing my own, what you would call shaders nowadays.
Right.
But I didn't do it too much, and it was basically a shove a pixel around framework. 2D, no 3D. Right. It had some physics. You could let balls drop at a real physics thing. And most of my work was done not at the level of the framework. The framework was pretty solid by the time I did it. So I fixed bugs, and I just wrote a game, again, targeted to the hidden object market without being a true hidden object game. It's basically Mahjong crossed with sort of hidden objects in a sense.
So for a long time, this is why small studios had a successful niche. They had their own game engines to build on game after game. And if you're going to make a new game from scratch, you had to replicate everything a small studio had done. Right. So Joe took all his work from before and kept building on it. But now you're working in Unity, right?
Correct.
So let's talk about the difference in that process.
Correct. Unity, I mean, I'm actually already to the point where I really should have done Unity 2 years ago. I was a little afraid of the learning curve. Part of it helped because I found a local kid that actually does good work. I mean, I've had several people do work for me, but a lot of people coming out of the colleges that learn Unity, they know how to shove pixels around, but thinking is a secondary thing. And his code was the first code I saw that actually was pretty good. And we've developed a mentor-mentee as well as I pay him. I don't believe in the internship model, so I do pay him. But he helps me with my learning curve, and I help him with getting better at debugging and smells of things and other things. So, and
All right.
Unity, I really believe I'm over the curve now. I could actually do just about anything I used to do in the framework. I can now do in Unity, and it's quicker. It's quicker to debug. It's quicker to program. C# is so much better than C++. I can't believe I put that off for so long.
Can't believe he's saying that.
Because I hate I started on C. I don't like the handcuffs, but when the stuff underneath the handcuffs works well, who cares?
All right. So now that you're working in Unity, one of the beautiful things about Unity is you don't have to be a programmer to make a game in Unity at all. You can use their defaults and go. Not your games, exactly. So my question for you is, how much time do you actually spend coding in Unity as opposed to using the more graphic side of that game development?
Very little. So the big thing with my games is it's a lot of on-demand stuff. So we use, in fact, the main reason I used my trainee, what do I call him? My student mentor, what do you call him?
The punk who works for you.
Not the mentee, but anyways,
the manatee.
No, what's the craftsman relationship?
Oh, apprentice, journeyman,
whatever.
Master.
So, anyways, the reason
has he graduated journeyman? Is he walking across Germany, dressed in his clothes, asking for work?
Anyways, the big thing I use him for is he's good with the Unity environment, and that he's taught me that over time. However, most of the stuff we do on the fly, and I wanted programmatic solutions to prove feasibility.
All right.
So we don't drop things into a scene. Okay. We load them through resources because I might have 1,000 objects over there and only use 50 different ones each level.
All right.
So there's very little that gets done at some of the GUI stuff does, but that's about it. Everything else sort of comes from from programming side of it. And I don't use scripting yet. I just use the C# stuff.
Okay.
No blueprints or anything like blueprints.
Okay.
Not there yet.
So let's flip to a different side of what you do. So one of the things that your fans love are all the different puzzles in the games you have. So you have a wide variety of types of puzzles, different puzzles that are done. Obviously with hidden objects being the core of what you do.
Right.
So talk about how you come up with your new puzzles.
Well, so there's two things. Number one, I don't usually consider most puzzles unless I know I can have about 5 variations and 5 levels of difficulty. So I have to sort of envision that first. With clutter, I knew right off I had an idea that was good enough and that nobody else was really exploring that space. And I've done 7 games now, and I truly have 35 different variations of the basic mechanics, and most of those 35 mix and match with everybody.
Okay.
So it's truly, I can do 100 puzzles and no 2 are the same.
All right. Now, you talked about having 7 different versions of clutter out there.
Yep.
So if you were with us a week ago, you heard Joe talk about the financial side of what he is doing. So we're going to recap that a little bit. Talk about how each of the games support the ones that have come before.
Correct. By sticking in the franchise, I get free marketing. Every game that I release ends up being free marketing for the earlier games and bumps a little sales to them while also getting the foothold. The main feedback I get from my games for people that like it is addicting. And since they are all different, but they have the same underlying mechanic, once they play one of them, there's a strong urge to play more than one. And there's people that's actually been playing my games, the clutter games, for over 5 or 6 years now, for over an hour a day. They
Excellent.
play one of the games or the other, and they tell me they have their favorites. Some people go, Clutter 2 is still my favorite. But a lot of them just jump around and so forth. So.
All right. So last question. You have primarily been a PC game throughout.
Yep.
And I know you're anxious to get into the mobile market. But, what else? What is next for Clutter? Tell us what's coming
not
up
so
on
much
Clutter.
mobile. I make a distinction between mobile and tablet.
Okay.
I don't have a desire to make a phone game yet. I want to make a version of Clutter that has no text, no story at all, so that it can go to China, it can go to all the countries. It can be played by anybody. It's either going to be called It's Clutter or Aha Clutter or whatever, but it's going to have
not Clutter. Okay Clutter. Come on, okay Clutter.
OCD is the one I wanted to make, which is official Clutter demo. But anyways, that's what's on the plan now, and I'm actually By the end of August, I'll have my complete basic Clutter engine ported. By the end of September, I will truly have. There'll be nothing I can. There'll be no level of my old game I can't play in the new game.
All right.
That's how quick Unity is. Even though it took me,
Very cool.
over 7 years to write all the variations, I'm finding I'm putting them in much quicker.
All right.
So.
Well, before I let Joe go, are there any questions from chat? Not that are not obscene. Is Wes Wilson here tonight? If he is, he's drunk under the bar or playing Galaga drunk under the bar. So no Wes Wilson yet. We'll see if he shows up in a little bit.
If he's out there, I'll send him back.
All right. Thank you, Joe. Yeah, send another
you.
developer back. Thank you, Joe.
Andrew.
And so Joe has a very distinct model using the PC download market. It's my pleasure to bring someone up who has a very different model. So Leah Knighton from ker-chunk Games. You want to tell us about yourself, what you do?
Definitely, yeah. My name is Leah Knighton. I am the co-founder and CCO of ker-chunk Games. We're a local mobile studio. We do mobile games, and we empower women players. And that's pretty much our company. I myself am an animator, character designer. Wear a lot of hats because we're a very small studio. So I also do 3D modeling, 3D work. We take on client work. Pretty much sums us up.
One of the very few companies outside of Floyd County I know that has an animator as a CCO.
Yay!
So,
that's me.
Congratulations on being in that role. So tell us about your big game right now, Prince Snap.
Yep, our big game, Prince Snapped, is a on-block game where you're trying to save a little prince. So you move around, little slide.
Don't use the word little prince. You got to be careful.
Little prince.
The French will come sue you.
That's true. Oh, yeah, that's true. That's a great movie, though, and a great book. But no, you save a prince, and you work with bounty huntresses. They have different abilities, and you rescue the prince. And the hero of the story is you yourself as the user. So, and our target demographic is women. So we empower women. But yes, we've soft launched in Europe. We're actually live on Facebook. But the soft launch in Europe is just to get user feedback, see what we need to change. And our big launch for the US is actually going to be this fall.
Excellent.
Yeah, we're really excited about
Right
that.
around Siege, right?
Right around Siege.
Beautiful. We'd love to hear that. So you're developing distinctly different from Joe into the mobile market.
Yes.
So talk a little bit about developing for mobile. It has some real serious limitations, but also a few advantages kind of in those limitations.
Yeah. Well, I'm a character artist and I'm an artist, so I make a lot of the assets. I don't do a lot of work in Unity. I have brought assets in Unity, so I honestly can't talk too much about the differences there, just because I'm a designer. But
one of the things that you do is you have very fun, I don't want to call them simple, but iconic images, whereas Joe has a clutter. He's got all these images.
Right.
He's taking up that whole real estate of somebody's computer monitor. He needs that space, which is part of why he hasn't gone mobile.
Right.
So talk about how you are working within those constraints to make something that really is an attractive game.
Yeah. Well, the art assets are super important for that because you can't have, it's on a tiny little screen, so the characters have to be very visible, especially in the design. You have to be able to see what they're doing. Their animations tell everything. It says what they're doing, what abilities they're using, and that's really important. As far as the pieces go, it's exactly the same. It needs to be clear to the viewer or to the player who is playing what is going on and where you're moving everything. And the UI is also very important, of course, in the game. But it's all very user-friendly, easy to figure out. It's pretty much.
And one of the things you're doing is you're very specifically trying to have the user think that the avatar is them in game.
Yes.
They are actively involved in the game. Joe's, they're a bit more passive. They're going through a story, but they're the ones moving these things around. They're not seeing an avatar themselves go through.
Right.
So talk a little bit about that projection, how you as an artist help facilitate a player's ability to empathize with the avatar.
Well, the characters, they interact with you, so when you touch them and move them around, they do different things. So it's like you grab onto them and move them around. The prince is just really arrogant, really annoyed with you, whereas the bounty huntress is happy that you're helping her, because girl power. And that it lets the player know, like, hey, this bounty huntress is the good guy. We're working with her to solve this puzzle and save this prince for money, I guess.
So talk a little about doing a limited European release. You had to localize it for Europe, and you guys are all native English speakers as far as I know. So talk a little bit about that process where you're releasing first in Europe as opposed to in the U.S.
Well, we haven't put too much marketing in our soft launch for mobile, but when we ran Facebook throughout the world, we had actually a bunch of users in Italy, which is funny because they don't have a huge English like speaking population. I mean, in the big towns, yes. But yeah, it was interesting to get feedback from those different countries, and we saw some things that are different with specific countries and how much the people make there, how much they're willing to spend on in-game purchases, and that was a huge like telling of wow, we would need to lower this like for this country, and whereas in Europe when you have your big first world like world powers, they are willing to spend more for the in-game purchases. So that was really interesting.
Well, Italy's had a great gaming community for years.
Yeah.
So I've loved going over there. They have a great convention. They're called Luca, which is
Luca?
a huge comic and gaming
Oh, that's
convention.
cool.
It's a lot of fun. Very dedicated player base there. And I love that they're so fascinated. So let's talk a little bit about that business model. So Joe's, we talked about, you buy his game. You go up to Iwan, you go to his website, you buy the game, it's yours from then on, and he's gotten the money he's getting out of you.
Great.
You have a different model. How does that
Yes. Well, our game is free to play, so we release it on the App Store, on Facebook. It's free to play. You can buy in-game purchases. So if you run out of moves and run out of time, you can either buy more, have more crystals, buy amulets, stuff like that. But as far as mobile goes, we're going to be doing in-game advertisements. So you can watch an ad to continue the level and just move forward that way. So there's always a way to advance in our game. We don't stick you there. You don't get stuck without paying or having to pay.
And on mobile, it's almost impossible these days to make a profitable game where you do that direct pay.
Yeah.
Free-to-play models become really
Most
one of the very
popular.
few successful models there. Some people advertising, but that's generally been it for a while. So what's next then for Print Snapped? Obviously, you're looking for a U.S. release this fall.
Yeah, our big U.S. release. We're going to be introducing World 2 with a new character, and she's super cute. So look for her. That's pretty much it for Print Snapped right now, and we're going to be looking into our second game soon. So
All right.
should be fun.
One last question, and then I'll turn over to any of you who have questions in chat. Should have made that more clear with Joe as well. When you're developing for well, actually, I'm sorry. Let's talk more about the whole model of ker-chunk games. PrintSnap is not the only thing you're working on. It's not like you have investors. You work on a lot of different things.
Yes.
How's the actual model, as the CCO, how is the model set up for ker-chunk to be a successful
for
studio?
how we were successful. Well, we take on a lot of client work. That's the key there. Before we had our studio in Norcross, we did a lot of freelance work on the side, just whatever could pull in money for us because it's completely bootstrapped. But now that we have our studio, we're bringing in clients just through the company. We're not doing any individual contract work, so that keeps us afloat. And then we work on the game whenever we get a chance outside of the contract work. And that's pretty much how we stay afloat. And we're doing well. We pay ourselves out so we can stay living and eating, and it's good. I think that's everyone's goal.
Can you list any credits for other games that you've worked out, or are those all under
No,
NDAs?
Yeah, the client work is all under NDAs. And my background's in animation, so you're not going to see my name on too many other games. But I've done a lot of 3D modeling, character animation, character art for some films and advertising stuff. Yeah.
Right. Any questions out of chat?
Yes. Radiant asks, does the fact that you are a female affect you in the gaming market, or is the stereotype that there are no women in game development false?
So Triadian asks, has you being a woman in game development affected how you operate in this field?
I mean, yes and no. We get often asked to do specific things because we're women in the industry, so we get put on panels just to talk about being a woman in the industry when we really just want to talk about our game. We also, it was a struggle to get funding. We didn't get funded. We were bootstrapped. I don't know if that depends on gender, but there are always new challenges that come up. But the big one is being treated only because we're women in the industry and getting stuff put on us because of that. So that's really the only thing I can think of.
One of the advantages, I guarantee you, I can't find that dress in my size.
Great.
Can you show off that awesome dress?
Yeah. Can they see me?
Where should she stand to be better seen? Right
Okay,
there.
good.
All right, excellent.
Yeah, it's my
excellent.
Legend
That's
of
not
Zelda
gonna be
dress.
my size.
I love it.
So.
I don't own Legend of Zelda. No.
All right, thank you, Leah.
Yeah,
Much
no
appreciated.
problem.
Or were there more questions we should address? All right.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. All right, I love it. We're going through a whole different spectrum now, bringing Ron Williams on out. Ron, thanks for joining us, sir, here on the GGDA on Mixer.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.
Ron is, I guess, my counterpart with the IGDA Atlanta. So you tell folks who don't know what the IGDA is, what it is, and what your role is?
Sure. The International Game Developers Association is a worldwide organization for game developers. It's the largest professional organization for game development. And here in Atlanta, we've got an obviously very healthy and strong chapter. Thanks on behalf of everything that the GGDA is doing in order to keep the industry strong here. And we're doing other things in terms of advocacy and making sure that we're helping developers to have a more international presence.
Excellent, excellent. And you've been involved in supporting other game developers even before you were with IGDA Atlanta. You have been involved actively in helping it in academia. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Aurora Game Development Club was an organization that I founded 2011 when I was at Georgia Southern University, a student there. And it's been an awesome opportunity to continue to work with that organization. Even present day, I'm still doing that. We've got a chapter at Georgia Southern still, and then at Georgia State as well. And the entire purpose is just to help the students, the student members, to grow professionally and in their development of their career skills that are they develop those in parallel with the things that they're learning in the classroom. So it's really nice to see them getting the opportunity to do things like build their portfolio, learn how to interact with people that are outside of their own discipline, and develop those skills that will help them hopefully land a job and be successful within the game development industry.
Very cool. And how long ago did you graduate from Georgia Southern? Not to make you feel old.
No, I hope I don't sound old by doing this. I only graduated in 2013, so
Yeah, but still,
about
it's been
4 years or so.
4 years and still very active. And a lot of folks, when they're out of college, will never be looking back. So it's great that you're still helping out like that. So we've seen two very different companies. One, Joe has got his own independent studio. ker-chunk is a bootstrap team working up. You work for a very different type of company. Tell us your title and who you work for, what you do.
All right, so I work for a company called American Gaming Systems. We are a real money land-based gaming company. So slot machines, think about the things that you would actually see in Vegas. Those are the types of things that we work on. And I happen to be a lead producer with the company.
So what do you do during your day?
My day consists of just making sure that the team is functioning and running and making sure that they have everything that they need to go. I work on a lot of the scheduling and coordination of projects, but pretty much my day-to-day is putting out fires and making sure that our team is up and running and functional.
So Joe is a programmer. Leah is an artist. You've got to look over all of those. Where do you consider your strengths when you're a producer?
Just communication. That's the number one aspect of a producer's job, is to make sure that you're able to speak the language of the artists, speak the language of the programmers, who are very different, but also make sure that you don't forget the very important sound guys and every other element of the game that might come into it. I mean, with real money gaming, obviously math is a big part of it as well, so that's one element that you don't see in most traditional video games as well, that I have as an extra piece to make sure that is never forgotten about in the balance.
And the security side as well.
Absolutely.
I love a story. A friend of mine told me way back in the 90s when he'd gotten to a company that did slot machines. He went down to do testing and was ready for the regular sort of play testing, making sure things worked and the like. And then they're down there hitting the slot machines with stun guns, cattle prods, everything else they can.
Yep, you'd be amazed at the types of tests they go. I mean, everybody obviously understands the amount of security that you have to have on the software side just in order to make sure that these games don't get hacked and nobody's taking advantage of it. But even the physical machines themselves go through a lot of very interesting tests. I mean, for the previous company that I worked for, there was a very interesting lab that I walked into on my first day, and literally they have an entire room set up where there is a robot that over and over is pressing a button, and they're waiting.
Get one of the birds.
They're waiting for the moment that that button finally gives out, and they're keeping a counter just to see how many times it takes. So there's some very interesting tests that happen with that stuff.
So we think about security, we think about the math side, obviously some serious coding on you. But one of the areas where I think the real money games, and real money is just a euphemism for gambling. All games are supposed to make real money, some do. But one of the areas that I think the real money games have really driven the industry forward is in the UI, is in the user interface.
Yes.
Because you have to be immediately understandable and easily accessible, and for a wide variety of players. So one of the things that I had to learn very early on in computer games was colorblind was an issue. We had different colored units in the game, and suddenly that didn't do any good if that's the only way you're differentiating them. We had to have other ways to show that you're this side and you're that side. So talk a little about the UI design and what kind of testing that goes through.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, so obviously one of the things that you see is our demographic is a little bit different than most in traditional video games, right? You typically have a little bit of an older player, and so one of the main things that comes up very frequently is eyesight is diminished when the player is older. So a lot of the things that we have to do are making sure that we're able to, as you said, be easily understandable from the moment that you walk up, be able to communicate with the player without having to have text, and then making sure that things are the appropriate size and colors so that anybody who might be visually impaired, might be physically impaired as well, has access to the game. So it's definitely something that you have to take into account with every single product that you do, because if you don't, you can easily alienate a player, and that really trickles down throughout the entire industry. I mean, one bad move for one game can mean the death of it.
Do you have specific written guidelines you follow, or is it just following your own judgment?
So we actually do a lot of extensive testing up front on it. We use a lot of the same UI across multiple games. So basically, setting up and templatizing that type of thing is the way that we try to get around having to do extensive testing for every product. I mean, there's quite a significant number of products that we put out on a per year basis, and as long as we have accessibility on the form factor that we're releasing it on, then it should hopefully continue to stand true throughout the life cycle of that form factor.
All right, so another area that differentiates you from Puzzles by Joe and ker-chunk is that they're both dealing in their own IP. They are focusing on Clutter, PrintSnap. On gambling side, real money side, one thing we know is the most popular games are generally licensed. You have a name to slap on it. What's it like as lead producer working with the licensors? I know you're not the number one person who has to interface with them, but you still have to deal with the fallout.
So interesting question. I actually, the company that I work for now, American Gaming Systems, we don't do very many licensed
Really?
products
Okay.
whatsoever. About probably 95% of our product is homegrown IP. And the reason why is because what usually gets all the flash and publicity are those licensed products, the things that you would see in Vegas and those bigger, flashier markets, right? But what we specialize in is the very centric gambler style games, the Australian style games, and the ones that are, for the people who live closer to the casinos, the people who frequent it. So that's a little bit of a different model than the license-based type of games that I did in my past.
So you get to, I bet you're happy you don't have to deal with the license side of it.
I mean, but I can definitely talk about that. I mean, at my previous company, it's got a lot of fun parts to it, but it's got a lot of headache parts to it too. I mean, you've definitely got to make sure that not only are you achieving everything that the company has as guidelines for the product, but also the licensor itself. And when you're dealing with licensors, there are oftentimes where you're dealing with not just one governing body, but multiple governing bodies, right? For example, if you're dealing with a movie, oftentimes you'll have the rights of the movie itself, then you'll have the individual actors that are in it that you have to go through for approvals, so on and so forth. So it can get very complex depending on the type of game that you're doing and the license that you're working with.
So we had a fun one, this was a while ago. We did a Star Trek game with Interplay, back when Interplay was still in existence. And they had, again, we had to do our stuff with Interplay. We then had to go to Paramount to get everything approved by Viacom at that point. And they had a rule called put some ducks in it. Anytime you did a bill, put ducks in it. And this came from the idea that they felt that the license holders just kept looking for things to find wrong. So they tested this by giving them a build of a spaceship of the Enterprise flying along, and outside you would suddenly have ducks fly by in space. And the complaint from Viacom was get rid of the ducks, and everything else got through. It was like they give them something they could pull out, and therefore everything was fine. So from that point on, they said put in the ducks, just put something that could get yanked out to make everyone in licensing feel they've done their job and go on. Do you feel you hit those sort of situations?
It really just depends on the relationship with the licensor. I mean, there have been instances where it's been an absolute joy to work with a licensor. They're very much, in tune with what it is that we're doing. We've had a long-standing relationship with them, so I think that we've built that trust and relationship to where they kind of trust us to understand the space that we're in and be able to execute and still protect their brand. Obviously, they still have to go through their approvals, but it's pretty painless when it comes to that.
All right. Well, I've got one more question for Ron. If you have questions, let me know, but I'll ask him. Whoa, we have a lot of questions for you. Sorry, Ron, you're not getting away that easily. So I will hold my question. Let's get the 3 questions from chat.
Randy asks, how do you accommodate?
Here, let's get your voice on.
Triadian asks, how can you accommodate an old small lady without enabling a younger player to break the law?
How can you accommodate an old small lady without?
Are there
Say
things
that
that
again?
you have to do to adjust? Are there things you have to do to adjust for your less able clientele that makes the games easier for your more able clientele?
Gotcha. So designing for your tightest constraint generally means that everybody else is able to assess it. Um, by dealing with like the lowest common denominator, for lack of a better term, think that it makes it approachable for other people. There are very interesting challenges with our industry in particular, like getting a younger player base to come out and be interested in slot machines, but I think that that's a whole different type of challenge. Just the appeal of slot machines to them, not necessarily the accessibility of it.
Gwinnett Girl asks, do you see other games in the future being modeled with more assistive, adaptive, rehabilitative qualities?
In the slot industry in particular?
Well, you're IGDA. You can talk about the whole.
Oh, sure. I mean, absolutely. I mean, one of the great things that's happening right now, I think, is there's been a lot more push for diversity and inclusion in games, and then also accessibility. And you're starting to see people take a lot more. First of all, awareness is being raised a lot more for these types of issues, and I think that developers are starting to understand that there is a larger audience that can be tapped, and there is a larger audience that is very interested in games, but they just haven't been able to play them historically just because of different challenges.
And if you work with a publisher, they want you to take that money into account.
Absolutely. So definitely keeping those things in mind. And there are a lot of great organizations. The IGDA is doing a lot of great things to raise awareness of that as well, and help with roundtables and things like that to get developers on the same page as to what the best practices are for that. So definitely look into those things because it just opens up the world a lot more to you.
And sales.
Absolutely.
Albedo Grace asks, do you hire hackers to practice the slots?
That's a funny question. I actually don't know how much I want to get into it. But we do have extensive testing, both in-house and third-party testing, and then, like you said, the regulators as well. So there's multiple layers of the testing that we do for these games to make sure that they don't go through any kind of compromise like that.
The amusing thing is we're doing the meetup at the same time a cybersecurity group is doing their meetup here. So we've had a lot of fun conversations already along these lines. All right, well, now I've got two questions for you.
Sure.
The first one is on the real money side. Talking to the MGM casino folks and the rest, they're very excited about esports because it's something that players will gamble in from their rooms. They can be anywhere in the casino and gamble, and the prop bets are just insane. You can bet on all sorts of crazy things. Do you see esports being an important part of gambling in the next 10, 20 years?
I could definitely see that. I think that that's the way that it's going. And when we talked about attracting a younger audience, that's the number one way. And I think the reason why a lot of these companies are so interested in something like that is because it's bringing in, fresh eyes on the products. And it's something that's interesting and entertaining and hasn't been done for before and is getting a lot of attention. So I definitely think that that is the next wave. That and then skill-based gaming as well is something that's starting to pop up a lot more. Um, those are the two areas that I'm seeing a lot of growth in the industry or potential growth in the industry.
All right, and last question. What's IGDA Atlanta doing next?
We got a couple of things in the works. I'm looking forward to actually hosting a developer meetup where we're going to help with matching developers with independent talent. So facilitating projects and helping people to match up with the resources that they might need. We also are working on, the IGDA leadership track at Siege. I'm very excited about that this year. It's going to be a lot of fun, and we've got
With
some
Jesse
awesome
Shell.
speakers. So, absolutely. And also at Siege will be the Game Studio Smackdown again. So we're looking forward to getting some developers out here and playing some games together and having a little friendly competition and hopefully American Gaming Systems claiming the throne of the top gaming company in Georgia.
Did High Res win last year? We got a throwdown.
We
High Res
have-
versus AGS.
Yeah, I mean, bring it on. We're ready to go.
Thanks, Ron.
Thank
Good
you,
having
Andrew.
So Edie, you wanna? All right. All right. So this will be
Hi.
fun. Edie now has worked with two very different companies from the ones we talked about before. So I want you to introduce yourself.
My name's Edie Wellfley. I currently reside here in Georgia, and I graduated in 2013 from Rochester Institute of Technology in Rochester, New York, with a Bachelor of Science in Game Design Development. And I'm currently a developer. I do primarily programming.
Excellent, excellent. And are you with the company now, or do you want to talk about your two previous companies?
I'll kind of touch a little bit on my company now. I'm currently with a transportations and logistics startup. Which I justify by saying that it's taught me a lot about writing APIs and security and mobile development. But yeah, we can talk about my previous.
And did you ever play Transportation Tycoon? That came out the same time as Mall Tycoon. That was a great game to borrow. To look at for inspiration.
Yeah. Unfortunately, my boss, I'm gonna say loose quotes on that because sometimes I feel like I'm bossing him around a little more than he's me. But owns a transportation and logistics company, so I get to have special privileges to kind of look at what his
Excellent.
other company is doing.
And there's also a MARTA hackathon coming up at Tech Square. I wish I thought I was going to remember the dates, but I didn't. But anyway, maybe we'll get those if anyone in chat's interested in them. But you've also worked for two more game dev type companies.
Yes.
And they had different models. So Dragon Army and Kniva. Let's talk a little about Dragon Army. What did you do with Dragon Army?
I was a programmer, and I worked on several games there. One of them being Robots of Ice Cream, which I believe was one of the top.
My little girl's favorite game. I can pull out the iPad right now and show you how far she's gotten on the robot.
Yes, it was one of the top downloaded games on Google and I believe Apple in 2014. I was brought on. It was an existing IP, and Dragon Army bought it before it was released. I was brought on as a Unity developer to help them finish the game. And I was on the iOS release. I did most of the Android release, and then we were asked to do an Amazon Fire TV release. I did that primarily myself, and the Google TV release. I did that as well.
So all of you have Google TV and Amazon Fire. There you go. You didn't work on Little Broken Robots too, did you?
I actually am credited on Little Broken Robots. I did work on it for a very short amount of time. And then before moving on to my second company, but I worked on Defend the Dam while I was there, and I also worked on a little bit of Paper Trail, and I did their game for the Atlanta Zoo.
Excellent.
Yep.
Excellent. Tell us about that one, because I don't think I've ever played that one.
Oh, well, the Atlanta Zoo came to Dragon Army. They were building a new reptile house, and they wanted a mobile app to match the kiosks at the new reptile house. So I built both versions using Unity.
Are they still there?
The kiosks, much to my detriment, are currently down. I have emailed the CEO of Dragon Army about that. Even though I no longer work for them, I went down there with a family member and saw that they were down and emailed him and asked him why they were down. And then
we have a family membership. We're gonna go fix them.
Yeah, I was like,
go on in and fix
I was like, I'll go fix them. Like, it's no big deal. I've been down there to fix them before. And he said that they were not replying to him about getting it back, but it's still available to download on iOS. It's not really a game. I mean, it's a game, but it's more geared towards teaching kids facts about different types of reptiles.
All right, I got strings I can pull with the zoo. We're gonna get those games up and going because they were not running last time I was there either.
Yeah, we can work on that.
Well, let's talk about that experience. So when you worked with the Atlanta Zoo, how much of the content came from them, and how much was your team coming up with what the game should be?
Oh, wow. So the ideas, I believe, came from Dragon Army.
Dragon Army doing the reptile house is great.
Yeah, it was interesting. It was myself and an artist working on it primarily. It was a little bit of back and forth. I went to the zoo quite a few times.
Yay, research.
Yeah, we had some back and forth. Essentially, in the game we ask the users to build their own reptile. So they have to answer questions about different reptiles, and they gain different body parts from said reptiles, and then they can go and create their own reptile using the different body types from different reptiles that they've unlocked. So
All right. So generally mobile style with Robots Love Ice Cream and Little Broken Robot.
yes, they were primarily mobile.
Robot was interesting. That was definitely client work, so that's pretty fascinating.
Actually, it was in-house work considered because when we bought the IP, we also hired out the artist, the game designer, and the original programmer, who was the owner of said content. So I got to work directly with the original owner of Robots Love Ice Cream and kind of take his mantle later on in the Android versions.
But then you went on to a company with a very different model
Yes,
called Kaniva.
Kaniva.
And at that point, they were still primarily the 3D social platform, I believe.
They ended the world of Kaniva, I believe, 2 months after I departed.
Oh, okay. All right.
So I was with them all during their World of Kaniva time.
Well, let's talk about that because I loved how that integrated a 3D perspective, a bunch of player avatar character actions, and strong social functionality.
Yeah, it was primarily social.
So as a programmer, what were you focusing on in your time there?
We were actually trying at that time to build out different gameplay perspectives. We had such a strong social base, so for people watching, the idea was that you could dress up your avatar, kind of like a sim almost, and go into this 3D online world and chat and communicate with other users. Prior to me coming on, it was primarily like dance party related. A lot of people love to get glammed up, like they were going to the club and go and dance around in the club and open their chat. So when I was hired, the idea was to take that and let people create their own games within our platform. So not having to use like a Unity. We were going to try to be like another Unity, but for people who don't program, because we'd already given people the ability to build their own clubs and worlds, and we'd already seen people building different environments, bringing in assets from elsewhere, building their own worlds that were not club related. There was one world that I absolutely loved that was like ancient Egypt,
Oh, excellent.
and it was very big, and she had lots of different things going on, but we essentially were, as developers, giving them the tools to essentially make whatever they wanted.
Right. So let's talk about that, where you're basically being the enabler. You're creating the tools that the fans need in order to create what's cool.
Right.
So generally we think of a game designer putting their own vision into reality. And you're doing the exact opposite. You're giving the tools so other people can put their vision into reality.
Right.
What was that like as a coder? Was it harder? Was it easier as a result?
I guess it just depends. I found it rather easy because you build stuff so open-ended, and build stuff to have multiple text inputs and just make sure that the formula's right and letting people kind of run wild with whatever. So I found it really interesting in as a programmer, because I was used to having a designer tell me, no, this value needs to be 1.5, or forget gravity. Gravity's never really 9.85. It's always something slightly different. No, gravity needs to be this in order to work right. Whereas we just kind of let it go. Like, yeah, you can have gravity be whatever you want. So it was kind of liberating as a developer, because you didn't really have to worry about the specifics. You could kind of just let them do whatever they wanted.
So did you have a favorite tool that you implemented?
No, not really. It was all interesting to see how the users ended up creating with it. Yeah, so I built a clothing shop. So before you had to go online to a web browser to actually purchase clothing to put on your avatar. So I built a system where you could actually do it actually in the game itself. You didn't have to go to a web browser, which the idea being that if you don't leave the web browser, you're more than likely to stay in the game, right? So I built that, and just seeing like all kinds of stuff that people did with that. I mean, it was insane. So that was the most fun part about it, is actually seeing what our users did with these very vague concepts that we gave them.
Very cool. All right, so I've got another question for Edie, but are there some from chat to throw out there? All right, so I want to continue down that exact road. At Kineva, you get a lot of different types of player feedback, from the very positive to the very negative to the very unintelligible.
Yes.
So one of the things that all game developers have to do is learn how to interpret player feedback when they say what they want versus what they really want. The classic example I always throw out is people will say the paladin's been nerfed. That doesn't necessarily mean the paladin's really weak or not. It just means they're not having as fun a time playing the paladin. Why not? What can be done to adjust it? So when you started getting feedback from players, not only about what they wanted to see, but what you just created for them, how did you interpret that and make changes accordingly? What kind of things did you look for from the feedback you got?
Mostly because I was a developer, I got to pawn most of my feedback off to the lead designer. But our users were very, very vocal. So I had
Passionate.
Passionate. There you go. They were very, very passionate to the point of I had several of them figure out that I worked for Kineva and follow me around to listen to their complaints, and which was very interesting. So, some of it was A/B testing. We did a lot of unit testing, so we could tell, like, if users aren't coming back. We also had them categorized by new users versus the returning users, right? We could tell what was growing our audience versus what was not growing our audience. That, I mean, your feet speak. I mean, this is something that we recurrently hear, that if somebody doesn't like something, they aren't going to come back. So they were very vocal, using their feet, but sometimes the feedback that we saw scientifically was not the feedback that we were getting in chat.
Yep.
Which is a very interesting dilemma, and usually it just came down to the designer. Like, if the designer felt passionately about something one way or the other, we went with it. If we were getting if our existing community backlash so much that they were exiting, which was our core audience at that point, like, you want to build on to your current existing audience, and not alienate them, which it's a fine line to balance. Not alienating the existing user base, but you still want to bring on more people. A lot of times it just came down to either the CEO or the designer laying down the law and saying, no, this is what we're going to do, and we're just going to move with it. And a lot of the growing pains did go away for some of the existing users. So
Yeah, metrics don't lie. They just tell a really wacky story.
yes, and sometimes we would find that the metrics were corrupted in some way. Some of our users figured out how we did our A/B testing.
Oh, wow.
Which was a very interesting
Gaming the
experience.
game. I love this.
Yes, so we had a system, two different chat systems, because originally when you downloaded Kineva, it actually downloaded a second program for our chat, which back in the early 2000s when it was created was perfectly fine and normal, but in today's users, they expect chat to be within their main game window.
No client for that.
Right. So we were moving towards that paradigm, and we created two different chat systems, but both were within the browser or within the game itself. And I think that was the one time that they figured out which chat they liked most. So even though they were registered on our system as being group A or B, whichever one they liked most, there was a YouTube video out actually that we found where that they were circulating within their community, which also then helps having people out in the community on a regular basis to kind of see what they're talking about, what their gripes are. And they had figured out how to take a text file change that came with the download of Kineva and flip it in order to get the chat system that they liked most. And they started using this
I love dedicated fans.
on multiple different A/B tests. And so there towards the end when I was working there was a lot of hesitation about our unit testing data because we didn't know whether they were faking it or not. Like, it still registered as B if they kept coming back, but they were technically on the A system. So, it was very interesting.
Well, great stuff, Edie. That's fascinating. Any questions from chat before we let you go? Edie, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Can you do me a favor and sign a release before you get out of here so we own your immortal soul? They're right next to Bob. And Bob is our next speaker. Welcome back, Bob. Do you have any new thinkers to show?
I do. I brought a tablet build. I don't know if we
Excellent.
can see this or not.
Our AV man can make magic happen.
All right.
We don't have an HDMI cord. Sorry, it's a tablet. All right. So first of all, Bob's a repeat guest on this show. So if you could tell him a little bit about yourself and Thinker.
Sure. My name is Robert Waller. I'm an independent contractor here in Atlanta. I mostly do enterprise development during the day, but my passion is game development. So I've published 2 games, one mobile game, one on Steam, a puzzle game, and I'm working on my 3rd game, which I call Sinker, Sinkr. And just put up the Steam page today, so you can check it out on Steam and wish list it.
Yeah, we'll share that at some point.
Okay, great.
Right. Well, Matt, how can we show a tablet? You have a recommendation. Just to walk it right up to the camera, shove it in the camera's face. All right, Bob, walk it up to the camera and shove it in the camera's face, and I'll hold the microphone for you.
Okay, all right. We can actually show a trailer. Would that make more sense?
Whatever you think looks good. Whatever you want to show, Bob.
All
You want to
right.
show the trailer, show the trailer. You want to show game, show game.
Okay, let's just show the trailer. That's probably going to be easier. So, videos and play.
All right. Tell us when we're good. When we're gooder. Are we goodest yet? Are we more good? Are we more gooder? Are we more goodest? I was going to give announcements later. I can give announcements now if we need to. Tell us what we're seeing, Bob.
Okay, so this is the Steam page trailer for Sinker. I'm calling it a minimalist ambient puzzle adventure, right, or experience. Minimalist because there's no text, there's no formal tutorial. We try to build the tutorial right into the game. And ambient because I'm really a big space music fan, so I really had fun with the soundtrack and the ambient responses. The piano tones, there's a big viola bass, that kind of thing, that kind of responds to your actions.
So when are we getting the Tangerine Dream soundtrack for it?
This is actually a licensed soundtrack from Kevin MacLeod. So as I said, I'm a space music fan, so I listen to Hearts of Space on NPR a lot.
Great radio show.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess that's the end of the trailer.
All right, let's head on back, give you your own microphone, and let's ask questions about Sinker. So Sinker has a very distinct look and feel to it. So give us some thought. This isn't your first game by any means, and your games have had different looks. So why this now? Why the minimalist feel?
Minimalist because I really wanted, this is the first game I've done as solo, right? I've worked on teams before, and I wanted to make sure that the project was manageable for me. I'm an engineer, I'm the coder primarily. So in order to do art, I needed to make sure I could do vector art. So I decided I can handle using a vector program to make basic geometric shapes. And so that's what led me to the minimalist thing. And there's actually several games on Steam in this genre, and they're in the $1 to $2 range with achievements and trading cards. And they're kind of like filler games in between League of Legends or, Rocket.
I love it.
League.
So you play this while you're waiting for another game
Absolutely.
to fill out. And
Yeah, that's
Go
the
ahead,
idea. And so no text makes it easier to, globalize. I don't have to worry about, localizing it in each language. Try to make sure that the tutorials work without any text at all. Make sure the iconography works for the menus and everything. I really wanted to see if that would work for me. I think it's gotten some good feedback. I showed it at DreamHack. I showed it at a few other events here in Atlanta and got really good feedback. So I'm feeling positive about it. What I really need to do now is finish up the last 5 or 10% of the content.
which takes up 90% of the time.
Yeah, it takes a lot of the time. And then really work hard on the marketing, try to get the word out, make sure that people know about it before it releases. And I'm going to try to get it out, sometime this fall, September, October.
Oh, that's excellent. So I love what you were talking about, it being that game you play in between bouts of League of Legends, for instance. So when I was doing my PC games back in the 90s, the goal was always as much player experience, get them playing 40, 60, 80, Skyrim 1,000 hours as best you can. And that's changed. Now the idea really is manageable game bites, bite-sized pieces, having a positive game experience in 5 minutes, 2 minutes, 1 minute. How, when you're designing, how do you keep that time limit in mind? I mean, is it the number of player actions they're going to do? How difficult things are? What is it that helps determine how long the player experience will be?
Well, the levels in sync are relatively short, so the game would probably take 2 hours, 2.5 hours to complete for the average person, depending on how long you spend on a puzzle. But any individual puzzle may take from a minute to 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And so what I think would work for people that do primarily esports streaming would to be when they're having downtimes between sessions, they would be able to pick up something like Sinker and play it, which doesn't require a lot of explanation because it's pretty obvious how to play it when it's in front of you. And maybe it allows you to stop at any point. There are no timers, there are no things no score, nothing. So you can stop at any point, interact with your streaming audience, and then pick it back up. So
Right.
I hope that works.
I'm very glad you didn't use the term bathroom moment, which is what other folks have talked about their mobile games. My game is to be played in the bathroom. I time it that way. But in your case, you are very definitively trying to have a very elegant play style that's smooth, easy, but yet complex enough to tie up players. How much testing does it take to get that right?
To get the interaction with players right,
Well, the full balance of ease versus complexity. Complex enough to challenge them, easy enough that they can do it quickly.
yeah, I think what it's worked for me since I'm working on my own, and I actually work in a home office, which makes it doubly hard to get feedback. So the only way I've actually gotten feedback is to go to these events. We went to the Southern Fried, and I mentioned DreamHack, things like that, and actually watch over people's shoulders and how they interact with the game. And that's basically how I figure out what's working and what's not. And then talk to people after they played it, see if they thought something was too hard, too difficult, too slow, did it drag, did you enjoy it, those kinds of things.
So what are you watching for when you're watching over a player's shoulders when they're playing? What is you specifically keep an eye on?
That's an interesting question. What I really look for to make me feel good is to see those moments when the player pats himself on the back, kind of metaphorically, because they like,
The aha moment.
The aha moment. And if you can get enough of those in, then I think people will enjoy the experience. And when I see that happen, that kind of reinforces me to know, okay, I need more of those, aha, I got that moment.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. So your previous games definitely had different feels to them. Again, those were team-based. This is your first purely solo title. But what did you learn from the previous games that you're applying into here? They are very different, but there are some elements definitely.
Yeah, I
feel
think
similar.
the one I'm thinking of is our game that we released in April on Steam. It's called Vortex Jugo. It's a puzzle game as well, but it does have a very involved tutorial. And there was some pushback from players that didn't want to go through the tutorial to understand the mechanics. And that's fair, that's fair. But what I'm trying to learn in this iteration, this new game, is how to build a game with absolutely no tutorial, a very gentle learning curve, but not so gentle that people get bored, and try to do it without any text at all.
Excellent, excellent. So one of the classic discussions in game development is that player progression curve, where the player's ability needs to increase at about the same rate as the game's difficulty. If the difficulty rises too quickly, the player gets frustrated and leaves the game. If the difficulty rises too slowly, the player gets bored and leaves the game.
Right, absolutely.
So you're very distinctly trying to keep that all packed into a very compact time limit. So how conscious are you of that sort of
Well,
dynamic?
very conscious when I'm watching people play it, and and if I think that things are dragging, that's pretty obvious with people. They'll kind of, their attention will wander. It's pretty obvious when you got that wrong. So yeah, watching people play the game is really the best way I've found.
All right. So let's talk about the financials of this game. This game is going to be like a $1 or $2 download.
Right, so this is a premium game, and it's primarily on Steam to start with. It will eventually make its way to mobile because it's a good fit for mobile, I think. But there is like I said before, there is an audience for these minimalist games, filler games on Steam, and there's quite a few of them on there. And, I'm hoping that that audience will be receptive to it.
All right. So, but that audience isn't necessarily huge in the amount and willing to pay
No.
that much. You're not one of those people who's trying to eke every last penny out of your players with time limits and all that sort of thing.
No. Yeah, I think what I would be most happy with is just people play the game. I'm still what I would consider a fledgling developer. This will be my third published game, and I'm still learning the process. What I really want, what'll make me happy, is if people get to play the game. But you have to charge something. Otherwise, people think, why is this game free? What's the problem?
wrong with it?
So, I'm trying to keep the price low enough so that's not a barrier for entry. And I want people to play the game and talk about it, give me feedback, and, help me work on the next game after that.
Excellent. Any questions from chat before I go on to my last question? So my last question is, so far, what's the most important lesson you've drawn from this game? Get the game in more people's hands?
Yeah, I've been following my own enterprise development best practices. I do unit tests. I make sure that I don't have regressions. I think I've got the actual nuts and bolts of developing games down. The thing that I'm lacking and that I'm working on is making sure that that when when people interact with a game, that they're getting the experience that I want them to have. And so what I didn't do in the previous games that I'm doing now is doing a lot of public interaction with people playing the game. And I'm hoping that that'll make it a better product.
Excellent. All right. Thank you very much, Bob. Really appreciate it.
Sure, Andrew. Thank you.
And get you to sign your immortal soul away on that release
I'll
form,
do it.
too. And we have our last but definitely not least, join us. You have the game to show as well, or? All right. Good enough. All right. Well, let me bring you on over and let you introduce yourself, our concluding interview of the night.
All right, I'm Nar, also known as Ninrak. I've been running my company for about 14 years now, released a few games, and right now working on Elemental Rift.
Excellent. Okay. So tell us a little bit more about the game that you've been putting together. You've been working on it for a little bit, and it's definitely there's been a lot of growth in that time within the game.
Elemental Rift, it started off as kind of a project to help a very close friend that lived over in Germany. She was going through some really rough times, and as a developer, there wasn't really much I could do except for try and make a game and use some of those funds to help her. But game development cycles take so long, especially probably about 6-7 years ago. It was before Elemental Rift, but back then we were expecting 2.5, 3.5, 4.5, 5-year dev cycles, and this one kind of hit the back burner for a little while, and I had clearance, contracts were out of the way, non-disclosures were resolved. I could tackle this and kind of dive right into it. So it still is honor of the person that I was originally helping, but that's kind of taken a backseat to all the design aspects of polishing it out, giving it a healthy amount of content, getting communities involved, and so forth.
So Bob talked about one of the things he learned with this game was to get into people's hands. You've been doing that for a while. Any convention where you can show this to people, you're there with it. You bring it to these events to show it to people. What have been the best things you've learned through all that interaction?
I would say do it as early as possible, and don't be afraid of those initial reactions, because you learn so much more by doing it earlier than waiting until you think it's ready, and then you find out there's so much people don't get, or that you assume they would get, and it has changed the growth so much because of that.
Excellent, excellent. So let's talk about the mechanics. You have a lot. You're not a simple one mechanic game like what Bob was showing. You're a fairly intricate game. So talk about putting together the mechanics individually and then making sure they tie together well. This is something a lot of developers have issues with, having a game that's more holistic.
When I was originally doing it, I started off on a very simple, let's get the character jumping up and down. I originally wanted to do a 2.5D game, so they were moving on the Z-axis. Unity could handle that, but it could not handle rendering it the way I wanted to, because I believe level creation is going to be very important in the future. As I grow the intellectual property, I am going to be planning for and building for that. But because the engine couldn't handle it, I kind of crushed it down to 2D, and slowly build everything else upon there, including interactive stages, collectible items, summoning helpers. The newest thing I added is consumable healing items, and just kind of cranking everything out one piece at a time, making sure it's thoroughly working, putting it through all sorts of various tests, bringing it to various testers, then bringing it to conventions, watching how everyone is playing with all these elements, really knowing how things behave between each show so that I know what to focus on in terms of what I've changed, what needs to be improved, how the reaction and reception are going, and so forth.
Yeah, I'm really sorry that we couldn't get one set up here to show off because it is a detailed, fun game to take a look at. And to be honest, if you had a big team, I'd say you could end up in esports with it or do a whole lot of different things with
Yeah, I've been actively communicating with some of the local AAA. Well, I guess they'd be considered
Yeah.
AAA.
I don't know. I don't know if they would consider themselves AAA. They consider themselves AAA in quality,
Yeah,
but not in size.
but yeah, I've been like Smite and a few other community and Blue Mammoth on what it is they're doing, what they've learned. Not so much the behind the scenes secrets, just more of like business experience, so that we don't have to deal with non-disclosure agreements and all that. Just more of their own personal recommendations, what they've learned from, and how they grew from that, so that I don't have to make the same mistakes they did and can start a little bit better off. Since I'm doing it solo, I already want to avoid as many mistakes as possible and any slowdown, because every little step is like taking 10 other steps as well.
All right, I'm going to start asking you some questions about the live streaming of Elemental Rift. So if you have questions, start typing them into chat right now. So you're one of the developers who jumped fairly early into live streaming on a different service from Mixer. Go ahead and tell them what the channel name is.
Twitch.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
your channel.
Oh, my channel.
They figured out it was Twitch.
Yeah. Twitch.tv/Ninrak.
Nimrod.
N-I-N-R-A-C. Ninrak. Yeah.
Nimrod. All right.
Yeah.
And you stream how often?
At the moment, because of the string of conventions, I've kind of been on hiatus because I wanted to make sure I was bringing my A game for all these shows and being on top of that. But once everything settles down and work settles down, because I had to do some catching up with all of those conventions, I'll be looking at, it's still not a set schedule, but aiming for 3 to 5 days a week.
3 to 5 days a week. Now, that's a pretty significant amount of time. How much time do you stream each day when you're doing that?
I usually go for 3-hour sessions, enough to really get some content done, but not to the point where I'm staying up late and or not getting enough sleep for the next day.
Now, what I like is that you stream gameplay, but you also have streamed development. You're going to keep streaming development?
Oh yeah. Like the whole reason I started streaming was because I could tie it into what I was already doing and get more people involved and see what is going on behind the scenes, all the decision making, getting involved with everything, letting them ask questions or let them see why I'm choosing to pick this move over this move, why some of these decisions are made when I'm using a guest character from another intellectual property, and how all that reasoning came about, why I'm doing my pixels in a certain way, such as emulating a particular art style from another intellectual property, and just some of the other things like bugs and how they happen. They can kind of see that, and they get to see some bloopers from that live. But yeah, it's been mostly focused on the development part, primarily the art creation and sometimes programming. I'm still trying to figure out sound effects and music composition, how I'll tackle that. But it is something I'm looking into and talking to a few other musician streamers as well on how they're tackling it, so that I can make sure it fits with the way I'm presenting and still is a good experience based on the experience
that'd be
they've
really
had.
cool. I love making sound effects, and that'll be a fun aspect, just to be doing and getting feedback on at the same time. Okay, any questions for chat before I hit him with my last question?
Yes, Triadian asks, how do you stay motivated when a crowdfunding campaign does not go successfully?
Well, when I did my crowdfunding, I did it really early, and I knew I wasn't expecting to hit it big, especially with some of the other crowdfunding projects that were going on. I took it as more of an estimate to see where I'm at and the reception, not so much of the expecting to make it, but I did still chose Indiegogo for that reason, because that way I can still get the money that was donated, and it was still used to help fund the development. It wasn't enough to go full-time and all that, but it was more used to see where I'm at and see the interest and get the initial wave of people who are interested more than if this doesn't make it, I can't do it, or says as a morale bar. More, just use it more of like an experiment.
Any other questions from chat? All right, so let's do talk about your business model above and beyond crowdfunding. How do you see recovering your costs on this game?
At the moment, I'm looking at the single purchase model. I was exploring virtual arcade, but launching a new IP and virtual arcade is still not a well-known business model. It's going to be hard to project that along with a new IP. So it's what I'm planning towards, but at the same time, it's one of those for the sequel type of ideas. But just single cost, looking at unlockable content that players will see how it's unlocked so that they don't feel like it's locked behind a wall. It'll explain exactly what it is to do so they can decide, do I want to pay this $3 or do I have to go through this process to unlock this character, unlock these outfits, possibly unlock some items, maybe one of the stages. I'm still exploring that, and we'll play around with that idea.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And I've got announcements for all of y'all. Yeah, we'll just put it down here with a clang, dropping the mic. I have not been able to access my list of announcements from Zapmill. Thank you for putting up there, Zapmill, but Google Docs has been crashing on me every time I tried to open it. So we'll do this by memory. And let's start with the Patreon. We have a Patreon. If you want to see additional interviews with the people we've talked to here tonight or elsewhere, please support our Patreon. There's a link to it down in our description and down there. And maybe somebody is typing it into chat right now as I speak. I don't know. But if you support that, we can do more of these and provide more content along the way. Our next meeting will be September 12th from Kennesaw State University. We are going to be talking about casting. So you can find links to that on www.ggda.org. We are the Georgia Game Developers Association, so ggda.org. Up there, you can also find information on a live streaming workshop we're running this Saturday. Yes, we will have it on Mixer on this channel, 1 o'clock Eastern, but you can also be there live in person at Challenges Comics and Games at North DeKalb Mall. So again, ggda.org, you can find that information and join us there. We have got Siege coming up, and we mentioned Jesse Schell before. So make sure you come out. He will be our keynote October 6th to 8th here in Atlanta. SiegeCon.net. Remember, that's I before E, SIEGECON.net for more information on SiegeCon. We have a YouTube channel with a lot of good content. I think you can find a link to that in our description. If not, it's YouTube/Georgia Game Devs. So lots of good stuff there. Is Zapmill typing anything into chat that I've forgotten? All right. We'll let Matt do some of the announcements. Okay, nope. Apparently I've hit most of them. We're also going to be doing a game development workshop from the Microsoft Store at Perimeter Mall on August 26th. You need to sign up for that via Microsoft. I'll have to make sure that that link is up on gga.org. I don't think it's made it up quite yet. And we've announced the Georgia Esports League State Finals at Siege, October 8th, for scholarship money and paid internships. If you're a college student, get your school signed up now. All right, Zapmill, if there's anything I forgot, please put it in chat. And thank you to Antlion Audio because we're able to give you a 10% discount. And we're going to be doing an unboxing pretty soon of an Antlion Audio mic and showing you the difference in using that mic compared to a standard one. What have I missed, Matt?
Just before we go, yes, I am. Before we go out of line, we're going to do a raid. We have a raid to go to. So if you all will go to Nico Lexel after we go out from our broadcast. And Andrew, you want to come up with a raid call for us?
Oh, we got to have a raid call for this. Yeah, it's got to be the joystick raid. From Joystick Game Bar, if you're in Atlanta or ever come into Atlanta, great bar on Edgewood Avenue. Yeah, it's in the hipster area, but it's still a really good bar, and they do have Galaga and Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat 2 and so forth. So check it out here.